Hey everyone, today's video is going to focus on making a scatter graph using Microsoft Excel. I'm a big believer in teaching you how to use some of the tools on the computer, especially the one on Excel, to know how to make graphs and do some analysis of your data. I've heard from multiple people that have moved on to college that this is a skill that has proved very valuable to them. So I want to get you started on early. Make sure you know the tools that are available to you, but then also knowing what to do with them. Some of the things that the program can do, ways that it can help you, those kind of things. So the first thing you need to do, keep in mind, before we get started on the basics, or before we get started on the process, keep in mind that Excel is not the only graphing program out there. Apple has a graphing program, and there's probably some other generic ones, not saying generic in a derogatory way, just probably free, that can do a lot of the same things. There may be some things that Excel can do that other things can't do, but most of your graphing programs are going to do exactly the same thing. It's just a matter of making sure you figure out how you get that program to do it. So, first thing you have to do, you have to open your program. On our desktop here at school, right, there's Microsoft Excel. I double click it. That's not the only way to open Excel, but that's the way I open it. So there it is. So to start off, Excel is a spreadsheet program. It logs data and then it analyzes that data. So the first thing we need in order to do a graph is some data. So I have this set of data over here. The one I've highlighted says mass and volume of different amounts of water. I have highlighted the whole table, including the titles on the tops of the columns. So I'm just going to copy those, and then I'm going to paste them into Excel. Generally, you can do that without much of an issue going from Word to Excel, especially, like I said, with Windows stuff. And there it is. Okay? So the first thing you have to do in order to make a graph in Excel is figure out what kind of graph you want Excel to make. As we're going to discuss in class, this is a set of data that has, my bad, hold on. This is a set of data that has two measurements. So an appropriate graph here would be a scatter graph, because that's what scatter graphs do. They compare two sets of measurements. So here's my two sets of measurements. First thing I need to do is I need to highlight the numbers that I want Excel to make a graph of. Don't worry about the titles up at the top. We'll add those in later. But right now, just worry about the numbers. Okay? Excel likes numbers. If you start putting units within these individual cells, Excel's not going to recognize those. So really just keep the cells that you're trying to graph as numbers. You can save units like for the top and the labels and stuff like that. Okay, so we've highlighted the data that we want to make a graph out of. Then we're going to go up here to the Insert tab, and if you click that, a bunch of different kinds of charts will show up. We've already established that because this is a set of data that contains two measurements, we're going to do a scatter graph. So if I just mouse over scatter, you'll see that it says insert a scatter chart, also known as an XY chart. This type of chart compares pairs of values, just like it says. Excel, well, let me go ahead. So if you click that, it gives you a bunch of different kinds of charts that you can make, or a bunch of different kinds of scatter charts you can make. We're going to go with this one in the top left that just shows us the data points. And if you click that box, there it is. There's your first graph. It automatically shows up. Okay? Notice, a lot of the things that we need on a graph are not there, so we're going to have to do those. But you'll also notice that once it makes the graph, up on the top here, this green bar, it says Chart Tools, and it's got three tabs underneath Chart Tools: Design, Layout, and Format. That's what we're going to use to make our chart look the way that it's supposed to look. Okay? So here's your chart. Hopefully you're seeing a couple of things that you know are missing and that we're going to have to take care of as we go along. So come up here. Design is more about what shows up on the chart. There is going to be something under the Design tab that we are going to use in class, but I'm not going to show it to you in this video. Okay? Layout is the one that really we're going to use the most. So if you click the Layout tab, you'll see that the top bar changes, a bunch of new options come up. So first, over here on the right hand side, you have this blue, the blue diamond labeled series 1 telling you what it is. Because there's only one set of data on this chart, we really don't need to tell what it is. Our data, our chart title should take care of that. So I'm going to go up here to the legend, click that, and I'm going to click the none, turn off legend, because like I said, with one set of data on the chart, really your chart title should take care of that. So got rid of that. Alright, next to that is the two biggies that we need. So let's start with chart title. Hopefully you remember from either from in class or because you learned this before, all your charts need titles. So click that tab and then a couple options come up. I like above chart, but as long as it's there, I really don't care. So if you click above chart, you'll see that chart title appears above the chart. Obviously you need something a little more descriptive than that. So you can either go in and highlight chart title, or if you click up here in the formula bar, okay, and start typing, that will appear there. So make your chart title descriptive relating to what's on your chart. For example, this is some mass, these are some mass measurements and some volume measurements. So I'm going to say mass versus volume for an unknown material. And if I hit enter, that shows up as the title of my chart. There it is. Like I said, on this type of chart where there's only one set of data, really your chart title should take care of telling you what's on it. Alright, next, axis titles. If you click the axis titles, it gives you two options: horizontal axis title, vertical axis title. So let's go horizontal axis title. You only have one option there, title below axis. So I click on that and axis title shows up here at the bottom. Once again, you can either highlight here or click up here in the formula bar. This time I'm just going to highlight down here just to do it a little differently than I did it before. Here's where you have to be aware of some of the things that Excel does on its own. First, Excel will always put the first column on the x-axis. Oh, should have mentioned earlier. Excel works better in columns. You can get it to work if you put your data in rows. You just have to click a couple of buttons. It works more by default if you do columns, whatever. Okay. So our first column that was typed in was labeled as mass, and it was measured in grams. There's our axis title, and that's going to show up too, just as blank. So we're going to need to put that axis title into, or this column title into this axis title box. So I'm going to just type in mass, and mass is measured in grams, just like that. Okay, we just added the horizontal axis title, and like I said, the first column that shows up in your data table is the one that shows up on the x-axis on your chart. Excel does that by default. You can change it. Now I'm not going to go into that details right now, but you can. We need another axis title, right? Both of our axes need titles, so I'm going to go up here to the axis titles tab again, primary vertical axis title. You have a lot of different choices. I like rotated title the best. Honestly though, it really doesn't matter. So I'm going to click rotated title, and if you put it in, there it is right there, axis title shows up. Once again, you can either go and highlight the words in this box, or you can just click up here in the formula bar. I'm going to click there. As we talked about, Excel puts whatever's in the second column automatically on the y-axis. So here I'm going to type, I'm going to correctly type volume, volume being measured in milliliters. If I hit return, there we go. Almost done. We said chart title, axis titles, points on the graph. You'll notice that when we put in the axis titles, some of the horizontal lines that showed up here in your chart may have gone away. Some of the vertical lines may have gone away. Doesn't really matter at this point. We're just worried about the points. And then one more important thing. So last thing, we need to have some kind of line that shows the relationship between the measurements that we've been taking. So I'm going to right click on one of these data points. It really doesn't matter which data point, and like I said, there are many more ways to go about doing this. But if I right click on one of those data points, you'll see a bunch of things highlight. One of your options is the add trend line option. That's what we're going to use right now. So I'm going to click add trend line, and this window, the Format Trend Line window, shows up. And you can change the color of your trend line, what style it is, but I'm more worried about the trend line options. So trend line options window, first box, it says trend or regression type. If we take a look at this data, this looks pretty linear, and by default it puts a linear trend line into that data. There may be times when we're going to have to use different trend lines, and we'll talk about those more as we go along. Sometimes we'll use polynomial, sometimes we'll use power. Like I said, we'll talk about those as we go along. Trend line name really doesn't matter. That shows up in the legend, which we have turned off right now anyway. Forecast forward and backwards. You'll notice that automatically it just connects the trend line with the points that I have on the graph. It starts it on the first one, ends it on the last one. If you want it to go back forwards or backward, or forwards past the last data point or backwards before the first data point, you can forecast forwards, backwards. I really don't care at this point. Set intercept, you are going to keep that at 0. We don't want to keep that at 0. We want it to draw the line in that is most appropriate for our data. This box, though, display equation on chart. If you display equation on chart, you'll notice it puts the equation for that trend line that it drew in for that set of data points. Okay? That's going to be important as we go forward, and we'll talk about why in just a second. And this checkmark box, display R squared value on chart, that's a statistics thing. We don't need that. So the two things you really need in this box: first, the type of trend line you want to put in; second, display equation on chart. I hit close, there it is. I can move this around a little bit if I need to. Okay? The one important thing that I kind of want you to get in the habit of doing: Excel just puts a generic YX equation in when it sets the equation of the trend line. However, we made this graph out of actual measurements that we took. So I would like you to go in and manually change that trend line to reflect the data that was measured. For example, if I come up here, I can click in here and I can change the variables that we get, what they're labeled as. So like I said, Excel puts in a generic XY equation, but this graph was made out of actual measurements. So I want you to go in and manually change those. On the y-axis, I told you that Excel always puts the second column on the y-axis automatically. So I'm going to go in there and I'm going to delete the y and I'm going to put in V, because we have volume on the y-axis, just like it says here. Then I'm going to go in here, that x, I'm going to delete that x and I'm going to put in M, because mass is on the x-axis of this graph. Now you'll notice this is a linear relationship or a direct relationship, so this equation should look kind of familiar. It's a slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, especially before we change the variables. Remember, this being the m value, that's the slope of that line, which is going to be important for a lot of things. And then this being the b value, or the y-intercept, you'll notice in this graph it's really close to 0. That's the basic form of doing a graph in Excel. We're going to talk about little things we need to change, like what kind of trend line you put in and stuff like that, but we'll handle those details in class.